What's up, guys? It's Bromley from Empire Barbell. Today I want to talk a little bit about developmental principles. So one of the things I want to talk about is the relationship between range and load when it comes to developing yourself in the gym. So if I take something like a bench press, as you get closer to the top, the elbows get closer to being stacked over the shoulder. So as the elbow comes in and gets closer and closer and closer to the shoulder joint, eventually I'm at a point where very little force has to be applied to get that elbow to lock out under the same, if not even more weight. So mechanically you're stronger. Now, we're more than machines. We have to worry about how developed the muscles are, how coordinated our nervous system is. There's a lot of things that go into it. But if we're just looking at ourselves as a series of levers and pivot points, mechanically you're at the strongest at the top of the lift. It's the same with a squat. We know guys that can squat 500 pounds and run with a 1,000-pound yoke. People don't miss squats at the last 3 inches unless they lose their balance. So we know that we're stronger intuitively. We know that we're stronger at the top of the lift. So in general, we have this principle that the more range you go through, the lower the load has to be. Whereas the less range you go through, the higher the load could potentially be. And within that range is a general optimal position where you're going to get the best result as far as growth. So right here we have, this is a rough graph of growth versus a ratio of range over load. So when range is really high, load will be very low. That's going to put us way over here. When range is very low and load is very high, like the partial movements we just talked about, we're going to be over here. Neither of those tend to represent an optimal range for growth. Now, I need to specify a little bit. I'm not talking about bodybuilding training where we do isolation movements, where we go through this extreme range of motion, we're trying to build fatigue. The part of that equation that we're missing is the amount of work you do. So yes, bodybuilders train very light. They might go through a ton of range and the amount of fatigue they build causes muscle growth. We're talking about many, many, many sets. We're talking about a lot more work to get that effect. So if we can look at a movement, let's just say our control is any compound movement for 5 sets of 10. And we're going to try and find the most optimal balance of range and load to grow in that threshold. Then that's where we're going to find this, this perfect balance point. So if I'm doing 5 sets of 10 and I'm going through a very extreme stretch, let's say I have dumbbells, or let's say I have a camber bar that allows me to get just way down. I'm exaggerating as low as I can go and I'm going all the way up and rolling my shoulders forward. And I'm doing all of my reps that way, load's gonna be very low. Now I might get a good training effect, but over time you're gonna find you're hindered by lack of stability from all the motion you're going through. You're gonna find that load ultimately cannot be high enough to get the most bang for your buck at that rep range. Now conversely, if we're doing just 3-inch lockouts, your nervous system might adapt. You might end up handling a ton of load, more than you ever thought you could, but you're going to be very underwhelmed by how much actual growth comes. So developmentally, we have this idea where there's this balance between range and load, and the sweet spot is going to be up here. Now, a bench press started out as a developmental movement. It was a way to build your chest, build your upper body, and then people started applying it to powerlifting in the 60s. And then as time went on, people became very, very uber specialized to benching competitively, and they kind of threw away the developmental principles of benching. So this is another one where you can really short yourself if you are only interested in your competitive setup. Now let me show you how I used to bench. When I was 18, 19, I started to really dig into powerlifting mags, and I thought I was just gonna have this sick competitive bench press. And I spent about 1.5 years, 2 years digging into my competitive setup. I got very good at it, very dialed in at it. And I'm advantaged. I have most of my height in my torso, I have pretty long torso, I have very short arms. So when you pair that with an arch, and I can't even get in the arch I used to, but let me show you what my bench setup used to look like. Shoulders together, trying to push my butt and my shoulders as close together as possible, up on my toes, shoulders pinned back, close grip, take the bar out, and I'm just bringing it down to my gut and back up. And that's my range. Now that does all the things that you're supposed to do when it comes to a competitive setup. My leverages are advantaged. I'm very tight and compact at the bottom. I have a ton of compression. I don't have to move it very far. My range is so limited, I didn't even really have to worry about the flare where I get that bar back over my face, which is a better leverage position. I actually could move it very efficiently in a straight line, which made the movement very simple, very easy to execute. I followed that. By the time I was about 19, I had a 400-pound bench. and I did not look like I lifted. I mean, it's the most one of the more embarrassing moments, because I was a trainer at LA Fitness at the time. That's where I cut my teeth as a trainer. And I remember being at a bar and a coworker walked up with one of his buddies, and I was like a sideshow. He's like, man, would you believe this guy bench pressed 400 pounds? And he looked at me holding his beer, just deadpan. He's like, no, I don't believe it. I just remember looking at him like, man, you got a barbell? Let's do this right now. And then as that kind of sunk in, I was like, I was reminded of the Doug Young quote, anyone that says they want to be strong without looking strong ain't telling the whole truth. For all the work I did to refine this competitive setup, I realized a couple things. One, I realized I wasn't doing work that was causing me to grow. My shoulders were small, my arms were small. I was so interested in working into this leverage advantage that I wasn't building myself up as a whole. Remember, you need a broad base to get a high ceiling. I wasn't broadening my base, my ceiling stayed low, and I was just chipping away, trying to get better and better and better what I could potentially do with that limited ceiling. So that wasn't good long-term developmentally. Also, if we're talking about strength, we're concerned with application, with functionality. I wasn't increasing strength the way I needed to for the goals that I had. If all you care about is being a competitive bencher and that setup is just fine for you, I guess it really doesn't matter. But I thought my 400-pound bench was something substantial. I could not pick up Atlas stones. They'd be too heavy because I couldn't crush them and they'd slip out even with tacky. I had a hard time maneuvering around sandbags, trying to pack in sandbags tight enough to pick them up. I had to get real with the fact that my upper body was not as strong as my competitive setup led me to believe. So if I ever decide to do a powerlifting meet, you better believe this is going to be part of my contest peak. You better believe that I'm going to apply all of the strength I build to this. But to even get an impressive number with this setup, I still have to widen my base out. And I did not start growing again until I relaxed my shoulders, until I got used doing reps through a more full range of motion. I would even go so far, I would lift my feet up off the bench, or I'd have my feet on the bench. You see a lot of the best benchers in the world actually do this. You see on one end, the uber competitive specific guys that just chip away at their competitive setup and that's it. But the fact is the biggest benchers in the world have always been guys that do a lot of work, a lot of reps, and see a lot of growth because of it. So there's no way getting around the actual need to build size and strength. And I still see guys that aren't very well developed with very slight builds, who don't have very large arms, don't have very developed shoulders, and they're trying to find, just the other day I was talking to somebody, he was trying to find his appropriate setup. He's like, oh, I'm still trying to find the right arch. There is no amount of setup. There is no special grip, special technique you're going to use that will make up for the fact that you need to get stronger. You need to add muscle. That base needs to widen out. So remember that when you're growing. This is true for all lifts, bench press specifically, because the bench press is unique in that it doesn't stand alone as such a great developer as, let's say, a squat or a deadlift does. For plenty of people, they're just fine doing subtle variations of squatting and deadlifting. Benching, the muscles you need big, the bench won't build. Okay, doing benches alone isn't going to build you big fat triceps. They're not going to give you huge rear delts. They're not going to widen your lats. So benching specifically, you got to train like a bodybuilder. You got to grow. Every single one of you needs to get bigger. If you're happy with a peasant bench press, then don't grow. But if you're one of these skinny guys that rationalizes a 225 bench because you don't weigh very much, I hate to break it to you, you need to add some weight before you grow and you break that next threshold. So it's up to you to figure out how that fits into your master plan. I'm sure there's a lot of points I didn't cover, so go ahead and leave it in the comment box. Better yet, go ahead and leave it on the forum. Okay, start an account, start a training log, answer some questions that are there. We're closing in on 1,000 members. I want to keep that growing. Start some controversy. No sacred cows there, all right? Go on the forum, let everybody have it. So go ahead and leave your questions. I'll get back to them as soon as I can. Thanks for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Bromley Empire Barbell. I'll see you.